In the year 2025, in the serene suburbs of Richmond, Virginia, where tree-lined streets whispered secrets of old Southern charm, mixed with modern tranquility, Judge James Wilson, a distinguished black man in his mid-50s, decided to plant new roots after years of navigating the stormy seas of the courtroom. James had always been a pillar of composure, his deep baritone voice commanding respect in the halls of justice where he presided over cases that tested the very fabric of society, divorces that tore families apart, criminal trials that weighed guilt against redemption, and civil disputes that exposed the raw underbelly of human greed. But behind the robe, he was a man who craved simplicity, a refuge from the endless parade of arguments and appeals. Richmond appealed to him with its blend of history and progress. The James River flowing nearby reminded him of life's persistent current. And the neighborhood he chose, a quiet enclave called Willow Grove, promised evenings of porch sitting and backyard barbecues rather than late-night case reviews. His two-story colonial home, painted a soft gray with white trim, stood proudly on a corner lot, its lawn meticulously mowed, not out of obligation, but from James's own therapeutic routine of weekend gardening. He had inherited his love for the soil from his late father, a sharecropper who had taught him that growth came from patience and care, lessons that served him well on the bench. Upon moving in, James made it a point to introduce himself to the neighbors, offering firm handshakes and warm smiles that revealed the dimples in his cheeks, a trait passed down from his mother. Most welcomed him with open arms. The elderly couple next door, Mr. and Mrs. Patterson, shared stories of their grandchildren over fresh lemonade. The young family across the way, the Ramirez clan, invited him to their son's soccer games. And even the busy professionals down the block nodded approvingly at his well-kept property, appreciating how it elevated the curb appeal of the entire cul-de-sac. Willow Grove was the kind of place where kids rode bikes until dusk, dogs barked. In friendly greetings and community potlucks fostered bonds that felt genuine, unforced by the pressures of urban life. Yet, amid this idyllic setting, there lurked a shadow in the form of Emily Harris, a sharp-featured woman in her late 40s who lived 3 houses down. Her home, a pristine example of suburban perfection with manicured hedges and seasonal decorations that changed with clockwork precision. Emily wasn't officially the HOA president, there was no formal association in Willow Grove, but she acted like one, patrolling the streets with a notebook in hand, enforcing unwritten rules that she seemed to invent on the spot. Her background was one of quiet ambition. She had grown up in a small town nearby, married young to a man who left her for a younger woman a decade ago. And now she channeled her frustrations into micromanaging her surroundings, volunteering for every local committee from the garden club to the neighborhood watch. To most, she was tolerable, a bit nosy perhaps, but harmless until James arrived. It started innocuously enough, just a week after he unpacked his last box. One evening, as James watered his newly planted azaleas under the soft glow of his porch light, Emily approached with purposeful strides, her lips pursed in that perpetual expression of mild disapproval. "Good evening, Judge Wilson," she said, her voice clipped and formal, as if addressing a suspect rather than a neighbor. "I've noticed your porch light stays on well past 10 o'clock. It disrupts the ambience of the street, makes it hard for folks to sleep with that glare." James paused, hose in hand, and offered a polite chuckle, wiping sweat from his brow. "Evening, Miss Harris. It's for security mostly. I've got it on a timer till midnight, but I'll check if I can dim it a bit." She nodded curtly, but her eyes lingered, scanning his yard as if cataloging potential infractions. That exchange might have faded into oblivion, but the next day, a handwritten note appeared in his mailbox, citing the unofficial neighborhood guidelines on exterior lighting and suggesting he comply to maintain harmony. James read it over breakfast, shaking his head with amusement at first, attributing it to an overzealous newcomer welcomer. He had dealt with far worse in court defendants, who hurled insults. Lawyers who twisted facts so a fussy neighbor seemed trivial. But the notes kept coming. One about the shade of his mailbox, which she claimed clashed with the earthy tones preferred in the area. Another on the height of his fence, insisting it blocked views and fostered isolation. Each was signed with her neat cursive, "Regards, Emily Harris," and accompanied by a photocopied page from some outdated community pamphlet she must have dug up from the local library. James began to notice patterns in her behavior, not just the complaints, but the way she lingered on her walks, pausing in front of his house to jot notes on her phone, her gaze piercing through his windows like a hawk eyeing prey. He confided in his sister Angela during one of her weekend visits. She was a schoolteacher from nearby Petersburg with a no-nonsense attitude that mirrored their mother's. "Sounds like she's got too much time on her hands," Angela said, stirring sugar into her coffee as they sat on James's back deck, overlooking the small pond that bordered the property. "But watch out, brother, people like that don't stop at notes. It's like they're feeding off the drama." James nodded, but he wasn't ready to escalate. His judicial temperament urged restraint, documentation over confrontation. Meanwhile, the other neighbors started picking up on the tension. At a casual block party thrown by the Pattersons to celebrate the 4th of July, whispers circulated as Emily hovered near the grill, her eyes flicking toward James whenever he laughed with the group. "She's got it out for the new judge," murmured Lisa Ramirez to her husband, Raul, as they watched their kids play tag. "I mean, my mailbox is bright red, and she's never said a word, but his. Suddenly, it's a crime." Raul shrugged, but the seed of unease was planted. James, ever the observer, sensed the undercurrents, but chose to engage positively, helping Mr. Patterson fix a leaky gutter one afternoon, which earned him appreciative nods from the street. Yet Emily's fixation deepened. She began timing his arrivals home from the courthouse, noting in her journal, though no one knew this yet, the make and model of his car, as if building a dossier. One crisp autumn morning, as leaves turned shades of amber and gold, James found another letter, this one complaining about the sound of his wind chimes tinkling in the breeze, claiming it constituted noise pollution. He decided to address it directly, walking over to her house one evening after work, his suit still on, tie loosened. Knocking on her door, he was met with her surprised but guarded expression. "Ms. Harris, I appreciate your concern for the neighborhood, but these constant notes, they're starting to feel personal. If there's an issue, let's talk it out like adults." She crossed her arms, her face flushing slightly. "Personal is about standards, Judge. Not everyone can just waltz in and ignore how things are done here." Her tone carried an edge, a subtle undercurrent that James, with his years of reading body language in court, recognized as something beyond mere annoyance, perhaps resentment, maybe even prejudice, masked as propriety. He didn't press, bidding her good night, but the encounter lingered in his mind like a bad verdict. As weeks turned to months, Emily's actions grew bolder. She rallied a few like-minded residents at informal gatherings, subtly steering conversations toward maintaining property values with pointed glances in James's direction. One neighbor, an older white man named Harold Jenkins, confided in James over fence-line chit-chat that Emily had cornered him at the grocery store, ranting about how certain newcomers think their titles exempt them from common courtesy. Harold laughed it off, but James felt a chill. He had faced subtle racism before in law school. In early career promotions delayed for no clear reason, but never so close to home, where sanctuary should reign. To cope, James threw himself into routines, mentoring young black lawyers at the local bar association, attending church services at the historic Ebenezer Baptist, where sermons on perseverance resonated deeply, and spending evenings reading legal thrillers on his porch, the very light Emily despised, casting a soft halo around him. His best friend, Marcus, a fellow judge from the city, visited often. Their discussions ranging from case law to fishing trips planned for the summer. "Man, this lady sounds like a walking lawsuit," Marcus joked one night over bourbon, but his eyes were serious. "Document everything, dates, times, what she says. You know the drill." James did, starting a file on his computer, scanning each note, noting each stare. The turning point came on a moonless night in early winter, when James's motion sensor light flicked on at 2 a.m., rousing him from sleep. Peering out his window, he saw Emily standing at the edge of his driveway. Phone raised, snapping photos of his yard, perhaps the holiday lights he had strung modestly, or maybe just the house itself. Her silhouette was unmistakable, and a surge of unease washed over him. The next morning, over coffee with Angela, who had stayed the night, he replayed the mental image. "That's not normal, James. That's stalking territory." She was right. It crossed from petty to predatory. Asterisk. Reluctantly, he ordered security cameras online, installing them himself over the weekend, discrete devices covering the front, sides, and back, linked to his phone for real-time alerts. As he drilled the mounts, neighbors passed by with waves. But Emily drove past slowly, her car idling for a moment too long, her expression unreadable behind tinted windows. James felt the weight of it then, the way her obsession isolated him in a place meant for belonging. He thought of his late wife, Sarah, who had passed from cancer 5 years prior. She would have laughed at the absurdity, urging him to bake cookies and win Emily over with kindness. But Sarah wasn't here, and the void she left amplified every slight. Still, James resolved to endure, drawing strength from his heritage grandparents, who marched in Selma, parents who built lives against odds. Willow Grove was his home now, and he wouldn't be driven out by whispers or glares. Yet, as the cameras hummed to life, capturing the quiet street in digital vigilance, James couldn't shake the premonition that this was merely the kindling, and the real fire was yet to ignite, fueled by prejudices buried deep in the soil of suburbia, waiting for a spark to erupt into something far more destructive than a few handwritten complaints. The neighborhood, once a haven, now pulsed with an undercurrent of division, as James's presence unwittingly exposed fractures long, ignored questions of who truly belonged and how far one woman's control could extend before it snapped. In the days that followed, James noticed subtle shifts, fewer invitations to gatherings, awkward pauses in conversations, as if Emily's poison had seeped into the collective consciousness. He countered by hosting a small open house, inviting everyone for coffee and donuts, sharing stories of his journey from a modest upbringing in rural Virginia to the bench, hoping transparency would bridge gaps. Some attended warmly. The Pattersons brought pie, the Ramirez's their kids' drawings, but Emily declined with a terse note slipped under his door, regretfully unavailable. "Please ensure your event adheres to noise guidelines." It was laughable, yet telling. Marcus advised legal action, perhaps a restraining order, but James hesitated. As a judge, he knew the system intimately, the way it could escalate conflicts into spectacles. Instead, he focused on self-preservation, upgrading his home alarm, and varying his routines to avoid predictability. Angela worried constantly, calling daily, "You're too stoic, James. This isn't a courtroom. It's your life." He assured her he was fine, but inwardly, doubts crept in, doubts about safety, about fitting in a world that still viewed him through tinted lenses. One evening, as snow flurried gently, blanketing the lawns in white, James sat by his fireplace, reviewing footage from the cameras. There she was again, Emily, walking her dog at odd hours, lingering just long enough to stare. It wasn't evidence of crime, but of intent, a slow-building campaign that eroded his peace. The suburb's facade of unity cracked further when Harold confided over beers that Emily had started a private group chat, venting about outsiders disrupting the vibe, her words laced with coded language that hinted at race without saying it. Outright, James thanked him for the heads up, but the revelation stung, reminding him that progress was fragile. That even in 2025, old biases lingered like ghosts in the attics of polite society. He decided to confront her once more, this time with witnesses. But before he could, another incident unfolded. A rock thrown at his window late at night, shattering the glass and his illusions of safety. The cameras caught a fleeting shadow, too vague for identification, but James knew. He reported it to the police, a minor vandalism charge that went nowhere without proof, but it marked an escalation. Neighbors rallied quietly. Lisa dropped off a casserole. Raoul offered to help repair the window, but Emily's silence was deafening. Her house lights off as if she feigned ignorance. As winter deepened, James's resolve hardened. He wasn't just a resident anymore, but a symbol, unwillingly thrust into a battle for dignity in his own backyard. The tension simmered, each day adding layers to the narrative, until the midnight photography sessions became routine. Emily's obsession manifesting in digital snapshots that she perhaps reviewed alone, plotting her next move. James, ever the strategist, prepared mentally for what might come, drawing on courtroom tactics to anticipate her plays. Little did he know, the flames of resentment were already licking at the edges of his world, ready to consume everything in a blaze of unchecked hatred, as the chill of winter gave way to the budding warmth of spring in 2025, Richmond, Virginia. The simmering animosity between Judge James Wilson and his neighbor, Emily Harris, began to boil over into overt acts that shattered the fragile veneer of suburban civility in Willow Grove. What had started as a barrage of nitpicking, notes, and judgmental stares now evolved into calculated provocations, with Emily leveraging her self-appointed role as the neighborhood's moral guardian to rally subtle alliances against James, painting him as an interloper whose presence disrupted the unspoken hierarchy she cherished. James, ever vigilant through his newly installed security cameras, captured footage of Emily distributing flyers at a community cleanup event. Innocuous at first, glance tips on lawn maintenance and recycling, but laced with veiled criticisms, like ensuring all residents contribute equally to our shared aesthetic. Her eyes darting toward his house as she handed them out. He reviewed the clips in his study, the room lined with law books and family photos, including one of Sarah smiling from a beach vacation they took years ago. Her absence a constant ache that made these intrusions feel even more invasive. Marcus, during one of their regular chess games on James's enclosed porch, advised escalation. File a formal complaint with the city. Man, this isn't just annoying, it's harassment under Virginia code. But James hesitated, knowing how such actions could backfire in a small community, potentially alienating those on the fence. Instead, he opted for diplomacy, organizing a neighborhood forum at the local park pavilion to discuss community standards openly, inviting everyone via a group email that Emily predictably ignored. The event drew a decent crowd. The Pattersons arrived with homemade cookies, the Ramirezes with questions about recycling bins, and James moderated with his judicial poise, emphasizing unity over division, sharing anecdotes from his courtroom about how dialogue resolved conflicts better. Then accusations. Yet Emily showed up unannounced halfway through, her presence like a storm cloud, interrupting a discussion on shared green spaces with a pointed question: what about those who flout basic courtesies, like excessive lighting or unsightly decorations? Shouldn't we hold everyone accountable? Her tone dripped with insinuation, and though James responded evenly, accountability starts with respect for one another. The air thickened, neighbors shifting uncomfortably as the meeting devolved into awkward silences. In the weeks following, Emily's tactics shifted from passive-aggressive to aggressively public. She started a petition for enhanced neighborhood guidelines, circulating it door to door, collecting signatures from a handful of sympathetic residents. Like Harold Jenkins, who signed reluctantly after she cornered him during his morning jog, whispering about property values plummeting due to nonconformists. James learned of it from Lisa Ramirez, who knocked on his door one evening with a copy. Her face etched with concern. "She's got about 15 names so far. And your house is mentioned indirectly as an example of why we need stricter rules." He thanked her, adding the document to his growing file. But the isolation gnawed at him nights when he sat alone, reviewing case briefs under the dim lamp, wondering if moving to Willow Grove had been a mistake, a naive pursuit of normalcy in a world that still harbored pockets of resistance to men like him ascending to positions of authority. Angela, sensing his strain during a family dinner she hosted at her place in Petersburg, pressed him. "You're not sleeping, are you? Those bags under your eyes tell stories." Over plates of fried chicken and collard greens, a recipe from there. Grandmother, James admitted the toll, describing how Emily's car now slowed conspicuously whenever she passed his driveway. Her windows rolled down just enough for him to catch snippets of muttered words like arrogant or doesn't fit. It was during one such drive-by that things turned physical. An egg splattered against his garage door late one night, the cameras capturing Emily's vehicle idling nearby, though her face was obscured by shadows. The police report he filed yielded little. A sympathetic officer named Diaz took statements, noting the pattern of incidents, but without direct evidence. It remained a misdemeanor at best. James cleaned the mess himself the next morning. The sticky residue, a metaphor for the lingering mess Emily was creating in his life. Undeterred, he channeled his frustration into community service, volunteering at a local legal aid clinic where he helped low-income families navigate evictions and custody battles, finding solace in the gratitude of those he assisted, like a young mother who hugged him after he secured her housing rights, reminding him why he became a judge in the first place. 2 level playing fields scarred by inequality. Back in Willow Grove, the Ramirez family became his quiet allies, their son Miguel often waving from his bike as James mowed the lawn, a small gesture that bolstered his spirits. But Emily's obsession intensified with the arrival of warmer weather. She began hosting informal block watch meetings on her lawn, complete with folding chairs and lemonade, where she vented about safety concerns posed by certain residents, her descriptions fitting James like a tailored suit someone with a high-profile job who might attract undesirable attention. Harold, feeling guilty after signing the petition, tipped James off anonymously via a note left in his mailbox. "She's gunning for you. Be careful." The warning proved prescient when, during a stormy afternoon, James returned from court to find his mailbox uprooted, lying mangled on the grass, tire tracks suggesting a vehicle had rammed it deliberately. The cameras confirmed Emily's SUV, circling the block multiple times that day, though again, no smoking gun. Officer Diaz returned, this time with a partner, taking photos and advising James to consider a civil suit for property damage. But James pondered the optics of black. Judge suing a white neighbor in a predominantly white suburb could ignite media scrutiny he didn't want. Instead, he repaired the mailbox himself, enlisting Miguel's help for a father-son-like bonding moment, teaching the boy about resilience. Sometimes, people push because they're afraid of change. We stand tall anyway. As summer approached, the heat mirroring the rising conflict, Emily's verbal assaults became direct. At a community barbecue hosted by the Pattersons, she cornered James by the grill, her voice laced with venom. "You think your robe makes you untouchable? This neighborhood has traditions, and you're trampling them." James met her gaze steadily. "Traditions evolve, Ms. Harris. Exclusion isn't one worth keeping." The exchange drew stares, and later, the Pattersons apologized profusely, confessing they had overheard Emily's rants laced with racial undertones, words like "those people" slipping out in private. It was a revelation that hardened James's resolve. He began consulting with a civil rights attorney friend in D.C., preparing a potential discrimination claim if things worsened. Angela, visiting more frequently, insisted on staying over some nights, her protective instinct kicking in like when they were kids fending off bullies. One humid evening in late June, as thunderstorms rumbled on the horizon, the breaking point arrived not in confrontation, but in catastrophe. James had spent the day in court presiding over a heated fraud case, his mind weary as he drove home, stopping briefly at a corner store for milk and bread. Arriving at his house around 9 p.m., he noticed nothing amiss. The porch light glowed softly, the yard quiet under the gathering clouds. He settled in with a book, a biography of Thurgood Marshall that inspired him, dozing off in his armchair around midnight. It was the acrid scent of smoke that jolted him awake at 2:30 a.m., his throat tightening as gray tendrils seeped under the door from the hallway. Coughing, eyes watering, he stumbled to his feet, the crackle of flames audible now from the rear of the house. Panic surged, but as training kicked in, he grabbed his phone, dialing 911 as he navigated the smoke-filled stairs. Voice hoarse, fire at 142 Willow Lenarson suspected. Get here fast. The operator's calm instructions blurred as heat intensified, walls blistering, family photos curling in the inferno. James burst through the front door, collapsing on the lawn, gasping for air. Neighbors emerging in robes and pajamas, the Ramirez family first on scene, Raoul wrapping him in a blanket as sirens wailed in the distance. Firefighters arrived in a blaze of lights and hoses, battling the flames that had originated near the back fence, accelerant traces evident even to untrained eyes. James watched helplessly as his home, the sanctuary he had built post-Sarah's death, succumbed, roof caving, windows shattering in explosive pops. Memories of holidays and quiet evenings reduced to smoldering ruins. He clutched only his briefcase, snatched instinctively, containing court notes, but nothing irreplaceable like Sarah's letters or his father's old pocket watch. Angela arrived an hour later, tear-streaked, hugging him fiercely. "Thank God you're alive." The fire marshal, a grizzled veteran named Ellis, confirmed arson by dawn, pointing to gasoline residues along the perimeter. This was deliberate. Someone wanted it to spread quickly. James's cameras, miraculously intact on the front, provided the first clue. Emily's SUV looping the block thrice around 1 a.m. Her figure briefly visible, dousing something near the fence before vanishing into the night. Neighbors corroborated Lisa had seen Emily walking oddly late. Harold recalled her asking about James's schedule days prior. Police raided Emily's home that afternoon, finding a partially empty gas can in her garage, residues matching the scene, along with journals detailing her grievances against James, entries escalating from complaints to fantasies of removing. The problem? As officers cuffed her, Emily didn't resist, but sneered. He had it coming, disrupting everything. The arrest made local news, Willow Grove buzzing with shock and shame. Residents like the Pattersons offering James temporary lodging while he processed the loss. In the rubble, sifting through ashes with gloved hands, James recovered a singed photo of Sarah, edges charred but her smile enduring, a symbol of survival. Marcus drove down immediately, helping coordinate insurance claims and temporary housing in a nearby hotel. His anger palpable. "This is hate crime territory, James. We'll bury her in court." But the twist fate delivered was surreal due to docket rotations in the Richmond courthouse. James's name appeared as the presiding judge for Emily's arraignment, scheduled mere days later, forcing him to confront his tormentor not as a victim, but as an arbiter of justice. The community reeled, media vans parking outside the ruins, reporters probing neighbors for soundbites. Did racial bias play a role? James, staying with Angela temporarily, stared at the ceiling at night, wrestling with ethics recuse himself, and risk appearing weak or proceed and face accusations of bias. He chose the latter, steeling for the courtroom clash, knowing this fire had ignited more than his home. It had exposed the embers of prejudice smoldering beneath Willow Grove's polished surface, demanding a reckoning that would test his principles to their core. As investigators pieced together timelines, uncovering Emily's online searches for how to start a fire undetected and forum posts railing against uppity professionals, James prepared mentally, drawing on Marshall's legacy. Justice demanded impartiality even when personal. The neighborhood, once divided, began uniting in subtle ways, fundraisers for his rebuild. Apologies from those who signed the petition, a collective awakening to complicity in silence. Yet, as arraignment loomed, James felt the weight of duality. Victim and judge, black man and authority figure. In a drama that transcended one suburb, echoing broader societal fractures in an America still grappling with equality. The flames had destroyed bricks and mortar, but they forged in James a renewed fire for fairness. Ready to face Emily across the bench, where her vengeance would meet its match in measured law, in the bustling heart of Richmond's courthouse on that fateful Monday morning in August 2025, where the air hummed with the low murmur of attorneys shuffling papers and clerks calling dockets. Judge James Wilson ascended the bench for what would become the most scrutinized case of his career, a surreal convergence of personal devastation and professional duty that thrust him into the national spotlight as both victim and arbiter. The courtroom, a grand chamber with polished mahogany panels and rows of worn benches, filled rapidly with a diverse crowd, local reporters scribbling furiously on notepads, curious residents from Willow Grove whispering among themselves, civil rights activists from nearby organizations holding signs outside the building demanding accountability for hate crimes, and even a few national correspondents from networks like CNN, drawn by the viral story of a black judge presiding over the white neighbor accused of torching his home out of racial animus. James, clad in his black robe that felt heavier than ever, adjusted his glasses and scanned the room with the steady gaze honed from decades on the bench, his heart pounding beneath the facade of impartiality as memories of the fire, the choking smoke, the roar of flames devouring Sarah's cherished quilt collection flashed unbidden. Emily Harris was led in by two deputies, her once impeccably styled hair now disheveled under the harsh fluorescent lights. Her orange jumpsuit a stark contrast to the tailored blouses she wore while patrolling the neighborhood. She shuffled to the defense table, eyes downcast at first. But when she lifted her head and met James's gaze, a flicker of defiance crossed her face, quickly masked by a feigned look of remorse that fooled no one who knew her history of veiled bigotry. Her attorney, a sharp-dressed litigator named Robert Klein from a downtown firm specializing in high-profile defenses, stood immediately to request a recusal, arguing passionately that James's victimization created an irreparable conflict of interest. Your Honor, this isn't just a case, it's personal. The defendant deserves a fair trial, untainted by the judge's own trauma. Whispers rippled through the gallery, phones buzzing silently as live tweets captured the drama. But James, drawing on his extensive knowledge of judicial ethics from years of lecturing at law schools, denied the motion with measured reasoning. The court acknowledges the unique circumstances. A Virginia statute allows for continuation unless bias is demonstrably proven. We proceed. The denial set the tone for a trial that unfolded over the next 2 weeks, not as a dry recitation of facts, but as a riveting exploration of suburban prejudice, the fragility of community bonds, and the enduring quest for justice in a divided America. Prosecutors, led by a tenacious assistant DA named Elena Vargas, a Latina woman whose own experiences with discrimination fueled her zeal, opened with a compelling narrative, projecting security footage on a large screen that showed Emily's SUV lurking near James's property hours before the blaze, the timestamp syncing perfectly with arson investigators' reports of gasoline poured along the fence line, igniting a conflagration that could have claimed lives if not for James's quick escape. Vargas didn't stop at physical evidence. She delved into motive, calling witnesses like Lisa Ramirez, who testified tearfully about overhearing Emily's racially charged rants at block parties, quoting her as saying, "People like him think they can buy their way into places they don't belong," words that hung heavy in the air, prompting nods from activists in the back row and uncomfortable shifts from some Willow Grove residents who had signed Emily's petition without fully grasping its undertones. Klein countered aggressively, portraying Emily as a stressed divorcee overwhelmed by neighborhood changes, suggesting the fire was accidental or perhaps set by an unknown vandal. But his cross-examinations faltered when Angela took the stand, her voice steady as she detailed the escalating harassment notes. Stairs, the uprooted mailbox, building a timeline of obsession that predated the arson by months. Her testimony humanizing James not as a stoic judge, but as a grieving widower, whose home was his last link to Sarah. The courtroom tension peaked during expert testimonies. A forensic psychologist analyzed Emily's journals, seized during the raid, revealing entries that evolved from complaints about noisy chimes to fantasies of cleansing the street of intruders. Language the expert linked to implicit bias amplified by social isolation, while a fire reconstruction specialist used 3D models to demonstrate how the blaze was intentionally set to trap occupants inside, a detail that elicited gasps and forced Emily to avert her eyes. James maintained composure throughout, ruling on objections with precision, sustaining some from the defense to avoid appeals, overruling others to keep the truth flowing. Yet internally, he grappled with surges of anger, recalling nights sifting through ashes for Sarah's jewelry, only to find melted remnants. Media coverage intensified outside, with pundits debating on evening shows whether James's involvement symbolized empowerment or endangered due process. Interviews with civil rights leaders praising his resilience, while conservative commentators questioned his objectivity, turning Willow Grove into a microcosm of national debates on race and justice. As the trial progressed into its second week, unexpected twists emerged. A surprise witness, Harold Jenkins, took the stand voluntarily, his hands trembling as he admitted to witnessing Emily purchasing gasoline at a local station the day before the fire, her car trunk loaded with rags, and how she had confided in him about teaching that judge a lesson. A confession he had withheld out of fear, but now shared, prompted by guilt after seeing James's charred home on the news. Klein's attempt to discredit Harold as biased fell flat when Vargas produced text messages between him and Emily, corroborating his story and exposing her deeper network of subtle allies in the neighborhood. A revelation that prompted soul-searching. Among attendees, Mr. Patterson, sitting in the gallery, bowed his head in shame for not speaking up sooner. Emily herself testified under Klein's guidance, her voice quavering as she denied intent, claiming the journals were therapeutic venting and the gas can for lawnmower maintenance. But under Vargas's cross-examination, cracks appeared. When pressed on her racial comments, she stammered, "I didn't mean it like that. It's about standards, not skin," a response that drew eye rolls from the jury. A diverse panel including Black, white, and Hispanic members who had been carefully selected. During voir dire, James watched intently, his rulings fair, but his mind racing with what if said he confronted her earlier. Could the fire have been prevented? Yet he pushed aside doubts, focusing on the law's demand for equity. Closing arguments capped the drama. Vargas implored the jury to see beyond suburbia's facade, arguing this wasn't about lights or lawns. It was about hate igniting destruction, and justice demands we extinguish it. While Klein appealed for mercy, framing Emily as a product of societal pressures rather than malice, The jury deliberated for 3 agonizing days, during which James retreated to his temporary hotel room, fielding calls from Marcus offering support and Angela cooking comfort food to remind him of family strength. While protesters outside the courthouse chanted for conviction, their signs reading "No Home" for hate. When the verdict came guilty on all counts, felony arson, property destruction with hate crime enhancements, and aggravated stalking, the room erupted in restrained applause. Emily slumping in her chair as tears finally fell, her defiance shattered. Sentencing followed a week later, the courtroom even more packed. With James delivering a poignant address from the bench, "Ms. Harris, you sought to erase my presence from Willow Grove, burning not just a house, but the ideals of equality it represented. Yet, in this court, justice prevails not through vengeance, but through truth. For the pain inflicted, the community divided, and the prejudice exposed. I sentence you to 20 years in state prison, with parole eligibility after 15 and mandatory bias training upon release." The gavel's echo sealed the moment. Emily, led away in cuffs, her final glance at James a mix of regret and lingering resentment. In the aftermath, as James stepped outside to a barrage of microphones, he spoke briefly. "This trial wasn't mine alone. It belongs to every American fighting for belonging. Hate starts small, but so does healing we rebuild together." Willow Grove transformed in the wake. Residents formed a genuine community council, not led by enforcers like Emily, but by inclusive voices. Fundraising to reconstruct James's home with modern upgrades, including a memorial garden for Sarah. Angela helped him sort through salvaged items, unearthing a half-burned journal of his own where he had written aspirations post-Sarah's death, reigniting his passion for mentoring youth in underserved Richmond areas. Marcus and he co-authored an op-ed on judicial ethics and personal crises, published in the Washington Post, sparking nationwide discussions. Protests evolved into dialogues, with local schools incorporating the case into civics lessons on bias and resilience. James returned to the bench stronger, presiding over cases with renewed empathy. His experience informing rulings on hate crimes that set precedents in Virginia law. Months later, as construction crews hammered away at his new home, a symbol of Phoenix-like rebirth, he hosted a block party, inviting former skeptics like Harold, who apologized profusely, fostering bonds that Emily's actions had ironically strengthened. National recognition followed, an invitation to speak at the NAACP convention, where he emphasized, "Justice isn't blind to pain. It sees it and rises above." Angela, proud, watched him thrive, their sibling bond deepened by adversity. Even in quiet moments, staring at the river from his rebuilt porch, James reflected on growth from ashes, not just physical, but communal. A testament to enduring against odds in an evolving America where stories like his illuminated paths forward, reminding all that from embers of division, flames of unity could ignite. The case lingered in public memory, inspiring documentaries and books. But for James, it was a chapter closed, paving the way for new beginnings, unmarred by past shadows.